truck should be running itself out of fuel from the float bowl here pretty quick. I think we should be good. I reckon we have no fuel pressure now, so we can shut it down. I want to run it out so I don't have any fuel pressure on the line for when I go to disconnect my carburetor. So that's always important, so that when I pull it all apart I don't run fuel everywhere. You can see that my fuel pressure is at 0, so we're going to go ahead and pull this little 570 off here and change some stuff around. So here we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take the carburetor off now. This is generally the air cleaner style that most people have to deal with, so we'll get that off and out of the way. So then what I generally like to do is unhook all the connectors to the carburetor. So ignore my zip tie that holds my throttle cable on. This is the farm truck, so not too concerned about safety, obviously. So we're gonna get on here and loosen all of these. This is they're usually a 1/2 inch socket. That's pretty conventional. So then you can just take those off with your fingers. And you want to take these washers off under these nuts as well, so that when you lift the carburetor off, you don't accidentally drop those into the intake manifold. So it's not absolutely imperative to do this, but I kind of like to. And sometimes when you lift the carburetor off, it'll help you a little bit. But then we're gonna disconnect our fuel line. So like I said, it's always good to have this depressurized, but fuel always tends to run out, so you don't want to really run that all over the paint on your motor like I just did. So I'll let that run out off to the side, or if you want to catch that with a rag, or a bottle, that's always kind of good too. So we're gonna disconnect our vacuum advance, kind of hook that in out of the way, find somewhere to hook it on, just stick it in there so it doesn't hang up. So now you want to get your return spring unhooked. Usually you can just pull that right off. I gotta be able to just lift off the carburetor if all your other vacuum connections are disconnected. So as I said, I'm gonna grab that washer there so it doesn't fall in the intake. I'm gonna grab this one off the back. Off she goes. Just like that. So I'm gonna set this here and kind of guide my fuel line out of there, and she's off. You want to make sure to wipe any fuel you drop onto your intake manifold off pretty quickly, as it tends to peel paint right off. So you want to go ahead and do that. And then finally, when you're working on your carburetor, probably won't reuse this gasket because I don't believe in reusing carburetor gaskets too often, but you want to kind of stick a clean rag into the orifices on your intake there so you don't drop anything in. So alright, let's go address the carburetor. So I'd had this carburetor on a different vehicle and I made some adjustments to it for that vehicle, and then putting it on this truck, they don't run, the carburetor doesn't run exactly perfect for this engine, so I'm going to go ahead and work back through my other adjustments. So the main thing I experience is a very light throttle. I almost get like a bucking sensation, not bad, but it's like a kind of a very light jerky feeling sometimes, and that's definitely signs of being lean. And what I had done is I had to open up these secondaries on this carburetor because the engine was much bigger, so for the curb idle adjustment on them. So I'm going to go ahead and close those down, and ought to be about 1/2 turn there, ought to do it, and they're all the way closed, so that's good. That's what we want with this motor that's a lot smaller displacement. So that ought to eliminate my little bucking issue, because what I was getting was a lean condition where I'd open these two throttle blades enough to roll down the road, but they weren't into the transition circuit enough, and these were just sucking primarily air. So I was probably in the 16 to 17 to 1 air fuel ratio range, so shutting this down should really help with that. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do that I know is different is I need to change my pump nozzle here. So in here right now I have a 28, and if I rev my motor and then rev it again in the RPMs, it has a light stumble. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is put a bigger squirt nozzle in here so I get the fuel into the engine sooner. So we'll go ahead and do that. Put this into a orientation here where it can kind of be seen, and that's located right in there. So we'll go ahead and get that taken off. Alright, now that we can kind of see what we're doing here, I'm going to jump in here and just unscrew. Oh, that's exactly what you don't want to do, and why you don't do this with the engine or the carburetor on the motor, so you don't drop this stuff into the intake. But you see there's a little black O-ring on there, and there's one that goes on the top part of the screw here, and then there's one that goes under that accelerator pump nozzle. So we're going to try and fish those out. And generally, if you don't damage them, you can reuse them. So, and those are the things that usually will fall into the intake. So we got that fished out, but we still got that little black ring in there. So, and naturally that's wanting to fall into the throttle bore. So I'm going to extract that, and there it is. So you really don't want to do that with the carburetor on the motor. A lot of people do it, but I don't prefer to do that. But anyway, so we'll get the other one out and stick that on now. Okay, so we're going to move from a 28 squirt nozzle to a 31, which I believe is the conventional one that comes on most carburetors. The only reason I had a 28 on there was I had a real torquey cam that this carburetor was on, the engine this carburetor was on, so it was into the vacuum pretty good. So it didn't really require much of from the squirt nozzle. But we're going to go ahead and put the 31 back in it. What I'm doing right now is putting some grease on there so this O-ring will sit on it, because I got to lower it in there just like that. So I want that to be right in the right place, so don't want that falling off. So go ahead and drop our screw through there, and then this is the tricky part. So your two nozzles here obviously go into the bores, so you kind of have to go around the vent tube and just kind of dance it in there. It's pretty tight fit, and you just kind of want to land that screw and get your pliers out of there and get on it with your screwdriver, and you're home free now. So you want to tighten this in there good, but not gorilla tight. And then for that should do it. So we'll move on to changing the secondary jets. Okay, so now we're going to remove the 4 float bowl bolts, and I'm going to try not to remove my fuel lines. It's rubber, so I'm hoping it just kind of bends with it, but I might have to anyway. Notice these aren't very tight. You don't want to tighten these very tight at all, because these Holley bowls are not very strong, so you can really easily crack them and then they leak all over the place. So I've done that before, which is entirely my own fault. So you want to be real careful when you tighten them back up. So get these all out of here. Come on. There we go. Now generally these are on there pretty good, so you don't really want to go sticking a screwdriver in between, because you'll screw the carburetor up, the mounting surface up pretty good. So I'm gonna run a little fuel out of there. So you kind of want to find a good place to pivot off of. So I got a little bit of a lip here that's not gonna mess up the mating surface, so you just want to be real gentle with it, and once you break it loose, just go real nice and easy, because these gaskets are reusable, but if you screw them up, they're not too good. So I think I'm going to go ahead and take this off, because I don't really want to ruin my gaskets all that bad. So we're going to try and cheat here and use some needle nose pliers, move that out of the way. Oh, and there went the bowl. So again, that's not necessarily what you want to do, but I guess that worked. I would recommend taking your fuel line off after that little deal. I usually have metal fuel lines on my carburetors, so I have to take them off anyway. So there's kind of the inside of the bowl. You know, you got your float and all that. So these secondaries are pretty nice because they got a plastic float. And I really wish they did that on the primaries, because that with fuel today, the brass float bowls, I don't care for them as much, but they seem to work. But you know, there's a reason I run regulators on all my carburetors. So then you just want to find a screwdriver, kind of like this here, that matches the jets pretty close, and this one's pretty close, so you just kind of want to apply pressure into the carburetor and turn it. Again, these should be in there tight, but not so tight that you crack anything. So we'll go ahead and take these out here. And get them changed out with some bigger jets. So there we go. So these were 63s that I had in the secondaries, and when the secondaries open up, I had light pinging, and since I have a very conservative adjustment on my timing, I know I'm just running them a little too lean, so we get some pre-ignition problems, and hence the pinging. So I'm going to up them to 65s, and that should eliminate that light pinging. So just like the jets came out, you just screw them right back in there. You want to get them started with your hands, and they should screw in easy. So if you feel any resistance, obviously you have them cross-threaded, and you don't want to do that. So you know, they should go pretty easily in there, and you just kind of want to give them a little turn for tightness sake, but you definitely do not want to tighten them so tight that they crack this metering block here. So that's pretty important. So give this one a little last turn there. So they're in there good and tight. And we're just gonna go ahead and, I guess, swing our float bowl back on, so we still connected to the fuel line. Now we're just gonna ease these on here. Want to make sure they're going straight through the gaskets and you're not screwing them in and they're binding up with the gasket and destroying the gasket, because these Holley gaskets are really not that cheap. So get those kind of started. And I just kind of like to use my socket off my wrench and run those down all the way. You want to avoid taking your float bowl off all the time, so you want to be pretty close on your jet sizing. You don't want to really be pulling this off so much, because these float bowls just are not that good and can crack real easy. They're real cheap material. So okay, we got them snug on there. So now we're just going to give them a little turn. So just a little turn going across pattern. And you can always tighten them up more if they're leaking, but if you tighten them too much and crack them, it's just going to be leaking all over, and there's really nothing safe you can do about it. So alright, we got that done, so we should be ready to reinstall the carburetor. I'm going to move this back up there before I forget. Come on, Bessie. There we go. So that's back where it's supposed to be, and we're going to go ahead and reinstall the carburetor now. Okay, so now you can go ahead and we're going to go ahead and put the carburetor back on. You want to make sure you brush off the bottom of the carburetor base plate before you go ahead and do this, as get some crud in there and you don't want to have it affecting the seal on your gasket. And you always want to use a new gasket. That's pretty important every time you remove your carburetor. You don't want to have any vacuum leaks. So just like that, she sets right in there, and you want to, as you're setting it on, you want to kind of feed your fuel line along. So we'll go ahead and put everything back on the reverse fashion that we took it off, and go ahead and fire it up and see how she runs. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. You want to tighten your carb down in a stepped crisscross pattern, and what I mean by stepped is that you tighten them a little bit at a time. And as I've said in my other videos, you don't want to tighten this down gorilla tight at all, because you can really warp these base gaskets. Again, they're made out of not very good material, so want to be sure to do it a little bit at a time in a crisscross pattern. You can always tighten them up more, but if you go too far and screw them up, it's really not what you're after. So just checking them all here about where I want them, and there you have it. So we'll get everything else hooked up here. Okay, so I got everything reattached. The fuel line is hooked back up with the hose clamp on it. Our vacuum advance is hooked back up. So we got our bolts tightened down to hold our carb down, our return spring, and I'm not going to hook my throttle up just yet, but you can if you want. That's kind of, I'm just not going to. I'm just going to mess with it from under here. But pretty much from there, we're ready to fire it up. And notice I don't have my air cleaner on it, because I want to be able to look down my venturis and make sure that accelerator pump is working properly. So we'll go ahead and get it going here. Move my nice recording device holder out of the way. So first what I'm going to do is I got an electric fuel pump, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my key to the ignition position here before I start it and let it repressurize the fuel bowls and get everything primed up. But also I do this so I can check for leaks, and I'm not seeing any. As you can see, our fuel pressure is beginning to climb, so I want to make sure it's fully pressurized. There we go, crappy gauge. So we're at about 4.5 and we're pressurized, so we're ready to fire it up. Need to get up there and give it a little throttle because I don't have the choke on. Give it a little bit more idle adjustment because I closed down those secondaries. There we go. As we can see, so our secondaries are working properly. Our manifold vacuum is where we want it, so our engine's still cold. So give a little bit more idle adjustment than it needs, but so far we're showing a steady idle and we don't see any leaks, so I'm going to go ahead and put it the rest of the way back together, and then we're going to go for a drive and see how she runs. Well, since I got a vacuum gauge on this guy, I can now see from my gauge read that little ridge. So this is what it looks like when you run it. Needle kind of hunting around a little bit, so we're going to go ahead and tighten our screws in. So we're going to go a whole half a turn since that's hunting so bad. So you want to do them evenly. Okay. And then that stabilized us out real well. So there you go. Now we'll take it for a spin.